what do we always say?
AI can't keep secrets.
AI doesn't keep secrets. So
Yeah.
whatever that model knows, it will tell you. They probably had some data that was proprietary.
Yes,
They probably
that's
had
true.
some data that has sensitive information.
Yes.
So in that case, you would actually have to train different models for people who had different sets of permissions.
I was recently talking to a consulting firm that wants to use AI on their vast amounts of data and research and do analytics. They want to make sure that AI has the right context, though. So they were going to go down the path of training a model, actually.
And by training a model, you mean train a large language model on their data?
Yeah, they think that's probably the best way to give it context.
Enterprises should probably never train an AI model.
But I thought training a model is what everybody's been talking about these last few years as like the best way to make sure that a model has all the data that it might need from an enterprise.
Yeah, probably in the vast majority of these cases, absolutely never consider training a model. There's much better ways.
Absolutely not.
Yes. And the reasons why are it's incredibly expensive,
Okay.
it's hard to manage, and you're going to end up having serious security and data permissions issues.
Let's maybe take a step back and let's put some definitions around this.
When people say training model, typically one of the things that that at least without further refinement is they're talking about the idea of from scratch training a large language model. This is something that's very rare, so probably nobody really wants to do this these days unless you're a very large model maker. It's sort of the philosophical equivalent to saying, like, let's say that you had a job you want to do in your company. Let's say that you then said, I know I'm going to find a small child that I will teach everything their whole life so that when they're all done, they'll be able to then work in my company. And so that idea of everything that this person needs to know will be trained by you over time. How to speak, how to think, how to do all of the background knowledge in the world like that. And that's the idea of training a model. So almost certainly nobody wants to do that because these days it's extremely expensive, like millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on which model and how many parameters and so on. So it's something that most people would ever, these days, would almost never touch. A few years ago it was a little bit different, but these days, like the actual frontier models are way too expensive for any enterprise to consider unless your job is model creation.
I see. Okay, so the model factories of the world, like the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, the Geminis, those are typically then the ones that end up training these foundation models that become the basis of a lot that we see. I've also heard of this concept of fine-tuning.
Yes.
But is that the same thing then?
Yeah, fine-tuning, reinforcement learning, this idea of taking a model and then being able to then make it so that you're updating its model, not starting from scratch, but updating it so that it knows more about specifically train into the model what to do. That is typically way easier and much cheaper.
Okay.
But definitely don't do that either. Really, when you're thinking about fine-tuning, one of the things to think about is where we talked about training from scratch is kind of like if you had gotten a kid and you trained your whole life, which is, of course, is completely unreasonable. But then imagine that if something like fine-tuning would be that you get somebody who's pretty educated and then you put them through a whole course of everything about what your company does, like a long, complex set of training about everything. And of course, that is possible to do, but most people don't do that. And normally the way you do this is you get somebody to come into your enterprise and then you would give them some information and you'd kind of like tell them what to do and then give them feedback as you go to help them on board and be able to understand things. So this is really the distinction between what the difference between training and fine-tuning is. Even though it is substantially cheaper and easier than training a model, which is really hard, it's still actually quite difficult to do for an average enterprise. And it has the same set of challenges. The expense is a little bit less of the like compute that goes into it. Is that you can manage those. Like most different models and model providers have a concept of fine tuning that they let you do, and you do need to pay for it and so on. But really, a lot of the challenges come into the idea of preparing your data, getting it ready, having somebody who has the expertise about what it takes to fine tune, and then the second challenge is really around managing that model. Like because in this case, like the fine tune model becomes something that like matters to you. It's like built on a model. They're typically not reverse compatible. So if you have a model that works with, a specific, I fine tune this model with this version and a new model comes out, you then have to go typically fine tune another model that has your fine tuning on top of the new model that came out.
Oh, so they're effectively two separate things.
Yes.
And not necessarily something that can be built on top of each other.
You can almost imagine that there's like the main model and you make a little tiny like kind of addition to it. And so you need to manage those things. And that actually starts to get complex. And then the third piece of it is the permissions challenge, the data governance challenge, which is anything that model is trained on, and we know this from previous episodes. So when we talk about models being like knowing something, what do we always say?
AI can't keep secrets.
AI doesn't keep secrets. So whatever that model knows, anybody who has access to that model, it will tell you. So I imagine in this enterprise that you're referring to, they probably had some data that was proprietary.
Yes,
they probably
that's
had
true.
some data that has sensitive information.
Yes.
Maybe not everybody in the company was allowed to see it. Maybe there are different people who work on different projects.
That's
in some
right.
cases,
The permissions do
strictly,
vary depending on the content. Yeah.
So in that case, you would actually have to, if you cared about that, you'd have to train different models for people who had different sets of permissions.
Oh, so you can't just tweak that same fine-tuned model for different use cases, different users, different content.
Knows it, and so it's just going to happily tell people about what things it knows. In addition to, like, let's say that new info comes. Like, let's say that every day, every company is constantly creating new info, and let's say you want this model to know about it. What do you need to do?
Well, you can maybe add to the knowledge.
Well, you need to fine-tune another. You need to update it again. You need to make that model now available.
For example, whether we're speaking to this consulting firm or even, many of the enterprises that we often talk to are in regulated spaces, you're seeing when there's a new piece of information that now the model needs to take into account, we'd have to fine-tune it. All over again.
So that fine-tuned model knows what you fine-tuned it on, and then anytime there's an update, which sometimes happens all the time, you have to refine-tune it. And also, if you want to take data away, most companies have this, like, at some point you change your mind about who has access to what, and then you need to basically build that in the model.
Right.
So this is not what you typically want to do, where you have this model representing all of this knowledge at once, that it doesn't have the fine-grained controls or the update cycles you want. So this is one reason why fine-tuning is a little bit difficult for many people, and so why you don't want to do that.
So then, Ben, for enterprises looking to leverage AI, they have all this context and business knowledge. If training and fine-tuning is not the way to go, what do they do?
Yeah, so these days, usually for most use cases, especially for enterprises, the idea of an agent plus the idea of retrieval augmented generation to retrieve context will handle almost all the use cases that used to require a fine-tuned or a reinforcement learning style of feedback. So you can get very far with a smart agent these days that has a very good retrieval mechanism.
And just a quick refresher from what we've covered in our past episodes, RAG is basically a way for AI to get that context from vast amounts of content. And agents is, when we leverage agents and give them custom instructions, including those guardrails, as well as tools so that they can go access the right knowledge in a very permissions-aware manner. And your point is a combination of RAG plus these agents can help enterprises achieve majority of their use cases.
Exactly. And this will help you not only be able to retrieve all the context you want, but basically avoids all of those challenges that we talked about for fine-tuning.
How does it avoid them?
So the first challenge being that the difficulty. So rather than have to figure out what it takes to fine-tune something and collect the information and put it in the format of fine-tuning and then manage this whole thing, then basically you just need to prompt the agent, tell it what to do. And now you do need to make sure that you have a platform that supports retrieval augmented generation, which I think is important in any case, and so you should have that. But then at that point, if you want to have an agent go find and look for information, you just tell the agent to go find and look for information, or it's built in to go do that. And very importantly, the second piece around the difficulty of managing this is that you don't need to manage models, you just need to manage the agents. And typically, an agents, when there's a new model update, it's kind of like almost like it makes them smarter. They can use the new models as kind of their brain, but they still roughly work the same way in most cases. So it's kind of just an upgrade to that agent, as opposed to something different that needs to be sort of complex managed and deal with where the model's stored and everything else. You can just have that model power your agent. And then one of the keys of all of this is that by using retrieval augmented generation, or specifically, like we talked about in previous episodes, secure retrieval augmented generation, you have the agent who can retrieve data, but you as a user who's interacting with it or who's seeing its output, it knows about your permissions, so it's able to only go get and retrieve things that you have access to. Mm-hmm. This means that you're able to go through and say, I want to add more info or take away info, and then the agent will be able to immediately respond to that information. So you don't have this idea of trapping information that is maybe somebody should know or not. So like the system you're using, so for instance for Box, we maintain permissions about what people have access to, and it's a user-based access control system. So then the agent would be able to look that up and to retrieve that, and only ever look at information that user manager has access to. So in that case, you solve the challenge associated with the idea of retrieving the appropriate information without really a concept of data leakage, because the user always has access to go look at those things and they're directly tied, what the agent has access to and what the user has access to.
I see. So those are some really great benefits of using RAG and agents, but we also talked about the two other techniques, fine-tuning and training. How does an enterprise know which path to go down? Like, how can they pick and choose, I guess?
So these days, typically, most of the use cases are easier for enterprises to use AI agents and to use retrieval augmented generation, and then to set up platforms to make that work that way. Now, maybe there are some cases where you had a very optimized specific model. Maybe you're doing something on the edge where you don't have all the power of a cloud-based system, or maybe some very specific use cases where you need some sort of smaller model or some sort of model that was very explicitly told what to do, and you don't really care about the latest in the frontier models. Some of those cases—
So very specialized edge use cases.
Or really, if you know all of these downsides that I mentioned and you still think that you would like to train, then probably that person would know better. But to the original question of, if you have a bunch of data in an enterprise and you want to be able to get the benefits of AI associated with it, my recommendation would be to use AI agents and retrieval augmented generation. Pick a platform that does this and does this well, like Box is one of these platforms, and then be able to then use that before you'd ever even consider training.
Thanks, Ben. That wraps up another insightful episode. Want more on fundamentals and use cases on this ever-changing AI landscape? Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss another episode. And if you're curious about another AI topic, let us know in the comments so we can cover it next time. Thanks.